Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Killing it. All right, man. So I'm back. It's been a week. It's been like 7 or 8 days since I made a video. I've been missing it. I really enjoy making these videos. It's a very creative process. So yeah, man. I'm glad to be finally back. We have the U.S. Championships, as you guys know, and it is day 1. So I do have the Jeffery Xiong versus Wesley So game. Hopefully everything is correct on the screen and the thumbnail. Yeah, everything looks like it's going pretty good. I will change my chess legend at some point too. I've had Nxd4 up there for quite a while, but yes, for all of my people in the Philippines, as always, Maligayang pagdating sa my chess, ladies and gentlemen. Masaya ko makita kang muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Hello, you lit. Almasal tayo, maglunch na tayo. Appreciate you guys very much for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. So if you guys are ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have for this game. So we do have D4. We got knight to F6, C4, E6. And any of you guys that watch my channel, you've seen this so many times. There's so many different options. Personally, I go knight to F3. You know, you're waiting to see like what black wants to do, if they just want to go D5 or bishop to B4, bishop to E7, you know, however they want to play that. We do see knight to C3, and that does allow the Nimzo Indian defense, which is what we see here. And so, you know, you have some different options. I mean, you can just go bishop to D2, you can go queen to C2, you can even probably pop a queen to B3 in there if you want to get interesting. But we do have queen to C2. You know, we do see castles by black. You know, queen to C2 is like multi-purposeful because, I mean, you are indirectly trying to take control of the E4 square. You know, as white, especially when you play D4 and C4, you are really dreaming of getting that E4 in, because if you can get these 3 pawns here, you just have like the best possible center the game can offer. So yeah, we do have E4 comes into position now, and then D5. As I always say, you know, whenever white or black does establish a really, really nice center, you know, the opponent is going to try to damage it as much as possible. So D5, also C5 is also a possibility here. And, you know, just to try to disrupt what white has going on. And then, you know, you have some decisions to make. But we do have D5, and then we have E5, and knight comes down to E4. So, you know, we do have a lot of pressure on this thing, and then we, you know, on the knight, and we do have the knight pinned to the king right here. So, you know, we do see bishop to D3, and now we have C5. So as you guys can see, everything I just got done saying a minute ago is, I mean, very legitimate. Like, you know, black is doing a very good job of trying to disrupt all that white has going on in the center of the board. Because as you guys are aware, the fight is in the center. Anytime you play a chess game, you know, whenever you see somebody playing like on the wings out here, stuff like that, I mean, you know, focus on what you can do in the center, and usually you'll have a good game. Knight comes to F3. We do see pawn takes D4, knight takes D4, and then the knight sneaks over to D7, and this is the best move in the position. It's super logical because, I mean, as of right now, you don't have anything protecting the E5 pawn. And so that's one of the things too, when you do establish a really, really nice center, especially a far advanced center, you do have to worry about your opponent trying to, you know, disrupt and pick off your overextended pawns. So bishop does come to F4. We see queen down to H4. You know, we do have to be careful. I actually covered this. It was a while back. It was like 6 or 7 months ago, that this knight is undefended in the middle of the board. So it might not really seem like, you know, this queen is really connected to this knight at all. But I mean, if you just kind of clear these 2 pieces out of the way, then the queen is going to be able to pick up this this undefended knight. So to damage where the queen has come, we see G3. The queen backs up to H5, making it impossible now for the king to castle queen side. So we see castles king side. We got G5, very hyper aggressive move. You know, you don't generally want to move the pawn that's directly in front of your king. So I mean, so as you can see, it is kind of damaging the king's position just a little bit. Pawn takes D5, bishop takes C3, pawn takes C3, and then we do have pawn takes D5. As you guys can see, you know, you do have your bishop on pre. But, I mean, you have, with this pawn takes D5, you have undermined the protection of this knight. So this knight is actually currently hanging. So you have a hanging piece and they have a hanging piece. You gotta, you know, you both have decisions to make. So pawn does take D5. We see bishop down to E3. Knight takes on e5. We see f3, knocking the knight back, but the knight does come to c5. And you can see that you have a lot of pressure on this bishop, so something has to give. Either, you know, probably bishop back to e2 or bishop to f5, which is what we see in the game. We have knight back to e6. We have rook a to e1. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and then the knight swings up to c6. Attacking the bishop that's nicely placed on a d4. And you really don't necessarily want to give this bishop up because it is a really nice attacker of these like weak and dark squares around the king. But you don't really have a super choice in the position. We do have f4, which is the novelty of the game. Pawn takes f4. Rook takes f4. And we have a lot of like Zwischenzug in between types of scenarios coming up. So we do see bishop taking f5, which is giving an attack on the queen. And so we take with the rook on f5, but then we do see knight takes d4. And this is actually a really nice move because, you know, your queen is being attacked and you're also attacking the opponent's queen. And actually, as it stands right now, black is up an entire piece. So you really have to take with the pawn here. You know, isolate a pawn. So you guys see, you guys have both isolated pawns on the d file. And you definitely don't want to go into something like this because as you can see after this, you're just down an entire piece. So this isn't an option. This isn't a legitimate in-betweener. So like I said, pawn did take d4. We see queen back to h6. Queen comes up to c7. I mean, you know, black does kind of have some loose pawns here. You know, they are up a pawn at the moment, but they do kind of have some loose pawns and stuff going on. So you definitely want to try to start targeting those. And then we see rook a to c8. And we have actually reached a position at the point in the game that if you don't want to pause the video and see what is actually the best move in the position, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So you guys already know that you moved on to c7 to start attacking some pieces. But you actually have the ability to threaten a very, very strong move because you're looking at, I mean, the fact that black has this pawn and this pawn that are both attackable and undefended. So you're kind of having to think like which one is better to attack. And it is actually this d5 pawn. The best move in the position, and if you guess it, congrats for seeing all of that. Sometimes you make a move that places a double attack on your opponent with like two pieces. But then sometimes you're attacking a piece and then a square. So it's really important to kind of look at squares in the game and see like, you know, kind of what you want to attack. So queen coming to e5 is the best possible move. You know, it's retreating the queen, getting it away. It is also attacking this undefended pawn on d5. And it's also threatening a really, really sneaky move. And the move is actually rook to g5 with check. The problem is this queen is, you know, attacking this diagonal. So if white is allowed to play rook to g5 with check, the queen is going to be forced to take because the king is stalemated. So like if we just make like a random move, let's say we do like a6 or something like that. Rook coming to g5 is just automatically going to win because either the queen has to take or it has to move in a way, some kind of way. But I mean, you know, so best possible move is showing like this and then the rook would take. And I mean, you can take back with either one. You guys can see that this is a super lost position for black to be playing. So you have to be aware that, you know, your king doesn't really have any squares to go to. So we actually see f6 in the game. So we do see queen taking d5 with check. The king slips over to h8. We see rook down to f2. Rook comes to c1. You know, it's not like good or bad really for like, you know, the players to be trading. It's fairly even. You know, because if the rook does take, I mean, the queen will take here with check and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's fairly even. But black does have to be careful because this pawn is passed in the middle of the board. So we definitely can't let that bad boy start running. Queen comes to e6. We see rook over to d8. We see d5 advancing the pawn. Rook takes d5. And this is actually very sneaky because, you know, if you do take here with the queen, you're going to be looking at rook taking e1 with check. You're going to have to swing up. And I mean, you know, it's pretty nice. So king comes up to g2. Rook takes on e1. And you have a very creative way to get this pawn and this rook back. So we see queen to c8 with check first. King comes down to g7. We see queen takes b7 with check. So getting our pawns back. King goes to g6. And then we see queen taking d5. And as you can see, it's like super, super even. I mean, you know, these pawns are kind of like, you know, attached to each other. This pawn is attached to this pawn. So, I mean, it's pretty much anybody's game. So the rook does come to e7. We see rook to f4. You know, this is always a good idea when you have like some pawns, whenever you do have pieces, just to make sure that they're supported. So rook to F4 is a really good move because, I mean, you never have to worry about the rook getting attacked or taken on this square because it's supported by the pawn. Queen does come down to G5, you know, just threatening, you know, the undefended queen. So the queen does come to G8 with check. Rook goes to G7. We see queen to E8 with check. Rook comes to F7. And if you really want to be sneaky, you can go queen to E6 because you are threatening to put the rook here and to trap the queen on the king. But, I mean, black would definitely have a way out of that. So we do see H4. Queen goes to D5 with check. We see king over to H2. Queen goes down to D2 with check. King comes to H3. And like I said before, you know, this queen isn't going to take this rook because it's supported by the pawn. So, you know, you're good. Queen comes up to D7 with check. And this is forcing the queen trade. So the rook actually blocks on G4 with a check. So it's like a really interesting like turn of events right there. We do see king down to H5. And, you know, this can't survive because this rook is pinned to the king. So you have to trade here. Queen takes on D7. Rook takes on D7. We see rook over to A4. King comes up to G6. We see king to G4. H5 with check, forcing the king over to F4. Or, I mean, you can always go down, but, I mean, it's pretty much the same difference. The rook comes up to E7. We see rook to A5. Rook over to C7. Rook down to A4. We see rook back to E7. Rook to A5. Rook back to C7. Rook to A4. And then we have rook back to E7. And it's basically showing triple zeros across the screen. There really isn't a way for either side to make progress. Like, this king is pretty much going to live, I mean, in this general vicinity here. So there's not really going to be a good way for you to advance your pawns. This rook is going to always kind of want to go back and forth. This rook is going to want to like make sure the king is cut off here. You can't really advance this pawn because you're just going to be capturing it. And I mean, this rook is going to do a perfect job of making sure this king can't move. And also you're trying to make sure this king is cut off with this rook. So as you can see, neither side can really make any progress. So that is that game. You know, so it's good to be back. Appreciate everybody that watches my stuff very much. There's a phrase that I had, but I forgot it. I think it was, I don't know. I'm gonna have to get that. I'm gonna have to get it back, man. So I'm kind of getting back into everything and my phrases and stuff like that. So I will do, when I get some sleep and I come back tomorrow, I will do the good mornings for everybody in the Philippines. But I appreciate you guys so very much. And I will see you guys next time.